Good morning. I want to thank everybody for coming here, whether you're an actual license holder or you're representing license holders. I see a couple of attorneys out here anyway. I think this presentation is going to be very helpful in explaining to you, the license holders, what the town's obligations are in terms of licensing and assisting you, and what your obligations are in terms of being a holder of a license. We're going to talk about several different topics. I think the big one you're all mostly interested in is the occupancy issue. We're going to put that at the end of the agenda so that it has the most time for questions. And what our objective of our presentations is to let you know what leads into each of these occupancy numbers. It's input and it's different processes. It's not as simple as looking at a book and looking at a chart and saying, you know, if I want this, then I need this, that kind of thing. So what I want to emphasize to begin with on behalf of the town and certainly the police department is our objective has always been and is going forward to help you come into compliance to properly be able to manage your businesses in accordance with the law. It never has been an effort to be punitive as to what we're trying to do. But, you know, certain things do carry with them penalties. And some things are common sense that you as business owners need to know or should know as a license holder. For instance, you know as a license holder you can't serve underage people. And you know, the town has an obligation as a licensing agent to test that process periodically. And we have a procedure in place that we're going to explain to you exactly how it's done. And I'm going to tell you exactly who to look out for out there so that, you know, you don't have, there's no secrets involved in this thing. Basically, I'm going to tell you up front, before the lieutenant does, if you see a guy running around in a little gray shirt out there in the street, that's who's going to be doing the compliance checks on you guys. So, you know, I don't know how to be more upfront about it. But the town has an obligation because we are responsible to make sure that you are in compliance with the laws that are on the books of the Commonwealth and our bylaws. We can't just ignore things that we know are not appropriate, because the public using your facilities believes that they're going into a facility and they're dining or they're going in for night clubbing or whatever they're doing, with the understanding that the club is, or the dining room or the restaurant's being operated in accordance with the laws for their safety. They have that expectation. If they don't have it going in, if something goes wrong, they certainly have it coming out. I'll guarantee that, especially after they talk to the lawyers, right, Kevin? So, you know, so the town has an obligation to make sure that we inspect to make sure that things are in compliance. Along with that inspection goes an obligation, we believe, as a town to put together a process, which it's still a process in progress, to help you get to where you want to be. You know, Steve Butler is going to mention the process for the occupancy numbers. You know, up front, the number that is on your occupancy COI right now is the number that we legally are bound by today. Until Steve Butler gives you another number, not the fire department, not the health department, not the state board of building inspectors, but Steve Butler. Until Steve Butler gives you another number, the number that is in effect is the number that is on that license or that certificate of inspection today. But he's going to outline the process for you to be able to get to that number to where you want it to be, or as close to where you want it to be as possible. And it is achievable to do that. So the way we're going to work today is we're going to start. Amy, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Baxter. She's our licensing administrator. She's going to be kind of the referee on this process today. She's going to go over the licensing process to begin with, and then we're going to turn it over to Lieutenant McVicker to talk about compliance. We're going to turn it over to Fire Department, Health Department, and various, and then we'll finish it up with Kevin Butler on the occupancy. So, and we'll ask questions, or excuse me, Sean, do you ask a question? Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm sorry. There's Kevins everywhere. We will ask that you ask questions of each speaker as you go along, so you don't have to wait till the end to ask your questions and stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I just wanted to go over quickly, Chief went over kind of what our agenda is going to be and how this is going to go today. I'll go over a couple of compliance issues first, and obviously we'll get to the main attraction in just a minute. I wanted to mention we have a lot of new restaurant operators this year. We had a very, I think, record number of turnovers this winter. We have signage in the back. If you don't have the state signage that's required, the ABCC signage, we have a bunch there. Everyone should have that up. One thing we're going to talk about is the state is going to be doing compliance checks all summer. So we expect them to be through here with that, and those need to be up as well. So if you need those, we have those as well. One thing I want to mention too, everything we do today, everything that we present to you, guidelines and processes, I've changed our website, our licensing page to have everything that we do today. Everything we talked about, we have handouts and such, but all of the guidelines that we're putting together with the fire codes, the health, everything that we reference. Also the tape of this, which NCTV thankfully came up with last night to be able to tape it. So those who aren't here, we will have that up there as well. So you can always go to nantucketlicensing.com. We'll direct you straight to that page. Everything that we have is up there. We'll just go over a couple of things. Lieutenant McVicker is going to discuss the compliance checks this summer and things such as noise complaints and how those are handled as well. One resource we always should have is what we used to call, obviously, the Blue Book from how it was printed, but our town alcohol regulations. Two things I wanted to highlight that are important, especially with compliance checks, is that all of your staff is TIPS trained. I believe it's within 30 days of hire is the regulation, but to make sure that those training certificates are on site at your location. If a compliance check comes through, there is a violation, that would be an additional violation. So that's just an easy thing to make sure that that's done and that's kept on site. Another thing that has come up, and a lot of you have changed over the winter, which has been great, but your manager is making sure the liquor license manager is current. If you're going through a change, just let us know. I know there's a timeline for some of you changing that, but let's make sure that we have the correct liquor license manager this year and get that set so that when this comes through as well, that's current. The other thing we want to talk about is entertainment licenses, which is going to come as part of this discussion after obviously all this is done, all these numbers are corrected, and we're kind of hopefully bringing up into compliance. We'll discuss noise complaints and that sort of thing, and it's certainly our intention to work with getting these entertainment licenses to be consistent and to be understood. I know there's a lot of confusion as far as definitions of some of these, and the selectmen have certainly tasked us with making sure that we bring that into a better understanding. It's not going to be taking things away from folks, but explaining things such as amplification is one we get a lot of. That's always is something plugged in. If it's additional, your house system is your house system. Background music that you play, you start plugging in amps and different things, that becomes additional amplification. If you don't have that on the license, that's considered a violation. Live music, such as a disc jockey actively playing the music, is live music, and that has to be something you have. If it's a playlist that you have play, DJ selected, that's fine, but that's been a question too as well, is to make sure you have live music approved, and that's going to be something that comes up with some of these numbers, and fire department will discuss when certain regulations come into play on entertainment licenses as well. Before we're going to get into next everyone who's going to contribute to what these occupancy numbers are. Any questions on basic compliance for me on licensing process or anything of that sort? And we have a mic here if anyone wants to come up or shout at me, anything. As far as the process, obviously you all know the renewal process and coming here, and Ann Cimitaro also, who works with me as well. If you come here and want to talk about something, she's also, God bless her, up front and can't hide as well as I can. please let her know as well so that we can get back to you as soon as possible as well. She's can get me and bug me and make sure that we get those answers to you as well. So if we have individual questions, please let me know and I'll come meet with you. I'm happy to do so at any time. So just let us know and we'll do that moving forward with your staff. So any questions for me right now? We want to get to the main attraction. Okay. So we're going to start and talk with health, fire, and police. I think we'll start with police and get into compliance checks and have Lieutenant McVicker address that, and then we'll get into the occupancy. Good? Okay.
Okay. Hello. I'm Lieutenant McVicker, Angus McVicker, for those of you who don't know me. When Amy says compliance checks, this is not new. Specifically when I am talking about compliance checks in terms of the police, I'm talking about underage drinking compliance. Okay, so I want you to sort of shift your thinking. I'm not talking about overall compliance, which involves health and fire and building. I'm just talking about the same compliance checks we've been doing for a number of years, and we're going to basically do that same compliance check this year. And so what that is, and the chief talked about it a little bit, is our seasonal staff who's not of age will be entering your establishments, your licensed establishments, and they'll attempt to buy some alcohol. The compliance checklist that we follow, I had up front for you to pick up. So basically, this is to make sure there is no questions as to how we operate our compliance checks, and you can go right down the list, just like we do before we start a compliance check. Okay, that will basically show the license holder what we can and cannot do. Okay, so that's the compliance check guidelines that we have to follow. In addition to that handout, I also killed a couple of trees doing it. I think I killed a copy machine as well, but I ran these questions, the most common questions that the ABCC gets, and I think this will help you with a whole lot of different questions you might have. So that's what this document is for, okay? I encourage you to read it. It's not an easy read, but it might get you an answer that you have a question to, okay? When I say compliance checks, basically that's going to happen 2 times this season, okay? That's basically the same thing we've done in the past, and that's what is going to happen this year. So we're going to have a minimum of 2 Nantucket Police Department compliance checks at each of the license holders' restaurants, establishments. In addition to the ones that we're going to do from the MPD, and I've sent this sort of flyer to you to review as well, is that the ABCC are going to towns in Massachusetts themselves to do their own compliance checks. This is not in conjunction with the NPD. This is on their own. We'll probably assist them in some degree, but basically you can plan on 3 separate compliance checks throughout the season. So, what's that? Yeah, well, one probably from them, but 2 from us, and that 2 from us is the same thing we've been doing in the past. That's not new. A follow-up. Now, so, you know, our goal is your goal. So our goal is not to have any issues. The same goal that you have. Our goal is to go in with someone that's not 21 and attempt to get served and be asked for ID and essentially denied because they're not going to produce ID because they don't have ID. Okay, so that's the same. We have the same goal. Our goal. We don't go into these things with the goal of getting 2 or 3 violations. The best case scenario for the Nantucket Police Department in terms of these compliance checks, and this does happen, is that we go to 30 different places in a night, and we get no violations. And so that might be part of your ability to communicate with all the other license holders. That's funny. That might be part of it, or the honest part of it is I think that you're all tired of dealing with this, and that it's easier just to have your staff ask for identification before they're served. And we leave basically by saying in the end, whatever the license establishment is has no violations. So that's sort of where our goals. Okay. I'll take some questions on compliance checks, if you have one. Yes.
Will the checks from the state be the same style checks that you're doing?
I don't know exactly. Thanks for the question. That's a good question. I don't know exactly what their intentions are, but I would assume it'll be something similar. I mean, these are their guidelines, so I suspect that they're going to be doing something very similar. They're probably going to be better at it than my 19-year-old college student is. So I suspect that's will be. They'll probably have other things that they're going to look for, like the signage Amy spoke of. I was going to talk about over-serving in a minute, actually. I just wanted to answer any of the compliance checks so we don't have to go back to it. Yes?
The notification that you published?
Yes.
In the INM?
Yes.
Is that how it's done?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because that notification has actually already been in the Inquirer Mirror. So fair notice would be is step one in our guidelines here has already been done. So you could expect compliance checks as early as tonight. Okay, so that's step one has been done, and it's in the Inquirer Mirror. Yes,
Does the state publicize as well?
they follow these very same guidelines. Yes,
Okay.
and I would imagine they're going to use the Inquirer Mirror. Yes.
Keep a record, obviously, of a violation. You keep a record for each restaurant on compliance as well, when they're compliant?
Yeah, we certainly do. It's certainly not the long narrative that goes along with a violation, but yes, we certainly note the ones that are in compliance. Yes.
Is that public record that you can look at?
I suspect it is, yes.
Where would we find it?
Records, right here at the first window when you come in. Okay? All right, so compliance checks. Not necessarily new. The next thing just came, yes.
So the only thing that the supposedly underage person will be trying to do is purchase alcohol. They
That-
won't be looking at your warning signs, looking at your license.
Correct,
They're just coming in, hey, can I get a beer?
correct. Or maybe a mixed drink.
What?
Yes.
What do they prefer underage?
Yeah, exactly.
They will not be producing any form of identification, not identification saying they're under 21.
No.
not
That's correct.
identification.
That's correct. Yeah, there's absolutely no trickery with this, okay? It's very, very straightforward. They go in, they're not 21. They don't look like they're 30. There's no trickery with that. It's right in the guidelines. And trust me when I tell you that our CSOs that aren't 21, they don't look like they're 21. So they don't, anyways. So they go in, it's very simple. They sit there, they order a drink if they're ID'd, and that often happens, as I just said. They don't say, I don't have any ID. If they're specifically asked, are you 21? They'll tell you, no, I'm not 21. So there's absolutely no trickery with this. It's our motivation is not to trick you into, failing and not complying.
Also, they don't drink the alcohol and they don't take it from the front.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. The chief just said that they don't attempt to drink the alcohol if you bring it before they're ID'd, or they don't leave with the alcohol. And again, that's right in here if you wanted to go down the checklist. It's pretty easy. If you read this and you share this content with your staff, I think it'll be easier for them to not sort of overthink this. Okay. Over-serving. So you brought that up a minute ago. And in terms of these compliance checks, we won't be looking for over-serving when we do this operation. Now, last summer, and we're certainly going to do it this summer, we have full-time police officers that are certainly above the age. We'll be stopping into restaurants and clubs and monitoring the crowd to make sure over-serving isn't occurring. So what does that mean? If the police off-duty, in terms of uniform, in terms of appearance, certainly on duty, but appearing off-duty, when they arrive at the restaurant, if they see someone who's been clearly overserved, go to the bar, go to the table, whatever the situation is, and successfully order a drink and consume that drink. When they're already clearly overserved, they'll be in violation.
Can you explain the fines and the penalties for that?
It could be, there's any number of steps that we will take, but, it could be a meeting with the selectmen to take a look at the liquor license. It could be any number of, it's just got to depend on the circumstances. So there's not one set position on how we're going to proceed after we observe a violation. But you can be sure that a police report will be written and all the information will be documented. That you can be sure of. Basically, talk about the documentation that would go along with any violation, whatever that violation may be. No, correct. Right. Yeah. If they're in a uniform, that makes it a lot easier. So we're trying to cut down on the overserved problems that basically come with that.
Will they be in violation? Off-duty officers?
No, they won't. No. They'll be clear-headed, so that's that goes along with that, right?
I guess, how are you going to determine whether the person's actually been overserved or not? This point in comment, like a Woods situation that just went on.
Right.
Pulled over and thrown in jail again.
And what was that?
And he hadn't been drinking.
No, he hadn't been drinking, but I think there's some other circumstances that go along with that case, but I wasn't there, so I can't make that determination. I would say to you that as police professionals that we are, we can certainly successfully determine when somebody is overserved. So when they're overserved, they're clearly overserved. I don't know how else to put it other than that, Larry. Not falling down, but handy to it.
Call that, what you're saying.
What's that?
It's a judgment call.
It absolutely is.
So is the standard then reasonable standard, reasonable person serving that the customer is reasonably that the person's intoxicated, and that's the standard?
The standard it would be very clear that they've already been overserved. It would be crystal clear. There wouldn't be any fine line of determination. Yes.
We have people that come in that have been imbibing elsewhere.
Yes, of course you do.
And they hit our establishment, we don't serve them anything.
Perfect.
And it's very challenging.
Yes.
Because we have to navigate, particularly if they're part of a dinner reservation, which happens repeatedly.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
holiday weekends,
Yes.
challenging. What is your recommendation for that? Generally, if we keep a log, if we are
Mhm.
cutting people off, obviously, it's challenging to update these things in real time.
Yes.
But if an officer comes in and views someone that we are not serving that's
Mhm.
intoxicated, that is part of the dinner that's going on, that we're
Right.
trying to manage with the help generally of the other people in the party, will that be something where we can have a conversation with the officer, or the officer will approach our managers or
Right.
leadership so that we can partner together? Because there are many of these things that we have policies and we have things that we do already proactively to try to navigate
Right.
this holiday environment. So sometimes what may appear as one thing is not actually what's happening. Someone's
Right.
drinking water, they're not drinking a cocktail.
Right.
We're trying to get them to chill out rather than to accelerate the situation. What's your recommendation on that?
Well, I like that idea of getting them some food, but at the beginning of this, what I specifically said was, because they're in your establishment overserved is not a violation in and of itself. Okay, so,
That's what I want to do.
well, I want to be clear. I would hope that was clear originally, but now I'll be crystal clear too. They need to be in your establishment overserved and then be given and ordering and given another drink, okay, not water, clearly, and again, this is, it's clear. It's a bottle of beer. It's a mixed drink that doesn't have, that's clearly a mixed drink, okay? And then they're going to take a drink of that. And then there will be the violation. Being in your establishment overserved is not a violation in and of itself. So it's an obvious potential problem. Of course it is, especially when they arrive at 12:30 at night. And I get it. We get it. The police officers that will be doing this operation, they get it. So I can only tell you that, again, our goal is not to jam you up. Our goal is not to find violations. We don't, at the end of the day, there's not a bonus because we can bring 5 violations forward to the Board of Selectmen. That is not our mission. And the mission of this meeting is to let you know that these things are going to be going on so that you can plan accordingly and help us, have a sort of issue-free summer.
Does the violation goes to the establishment, does it also go to the employee?
It does. It's specific to what the violation is, but yes, it's both. So your servers' responsibilities to, as they know with their tips training that they're all going to have, that they need to make sure they ID people and they don't serve people that aren't 21. Yes.
Will the officer that is observing and making the judgment call notify the owner, manager at the time of the event?
Right. So, that's a good question. So, to talk about the compliance check, we do it in a reasonable amount of time. We don't typically do it as soon as the violation happens because sometimes we find a violation on the second, establishment we enter, and then from there, basically it would be a waste of our time for the rest of the night because all the other establishments would know. So that's the compliance check. But now back to what I think what you were asking, Jonas, was the overserved part. We're not going to let a potential nightmare happen before our eyes. So. Correct. Usually, right. Right. No, well, we need to gather all that information. So the answer, it would typically answer itself because we're going to be asking to make sure we know who the bartender was or the server was, et cetera.
I mean, the customer too.
We do our best to that. I mean, they can tell us, and they have.
We have to make sure they get home either.
Right.
Friend or cab or.
Sure.
Police, yeah.
What's that?
That's where I was going with the whole story. That you'll know, and because if you see at 12 o'clock at night, there's a lot of balls in the air.
Of course there are.
And so you're trying to, navigate the balls.
Yes.
Hey, this guy is, okay, yeah, I got him. This is, Joe, he has not drinking, he's with this. Okay.
Right. And to be honest with you, that happens quite often. That the guy that's overserved or the girl that's overserved, they're typically with somebody, and whoever that somebody is isn't letting them drink. So that actually, especially the ones that are really bombed, they're typically, somebody's looking after them.
So you're saying that them being in our establishment, overserved, but not drinking is not a violation?
That is absolutely correct. Because as we all know, they could have arrived, half in the wrapper, and by the time they get in there for an hour, then they're completely, intoxicated. So, with never having anything to drink from your establishment. So that's why it has to be very clear to us that we see the actual consumption of alcohol in the ordering, etc. So.
You're going to be looking for the server serving it? What happens if his buddy picks up a drink and hands it?
Absolutely. So that's the whole part of this whole process. So, we make those exact observations. Because you've turned down people in the past that you feel have been overserved, and next thing you know, you see them drinking. Well, obviously we know how that happened, so we'll be, aware of that. We have to observe those things as I've broken them down for you. Yes.
And I know you had said that the people responsible for serving, whether it's the server, the bartender, in this, every case would be different, because in a situation where there's a guest at a table, and the bartender doesn't actually see the guest, a server orders a drink for them, the bartender makes the drink.
Right.
Will
Server's responsibility.
Server.
Yeah, the contact person.
Okay.
Yes.
My non-alcoholic drinks look exactly like my cocktails. How are you going to differentiate between the two?
We're going to do our best.
Is there a test involved? Is there
Right. Right. Well, we're not gonna just look at the glass and, we're gonna make make our observations.
I think that's where, like, trying to get back to the point, you would physically, the officer in the building would, hey, is there a manager?
Yes.
This served.
Correct.
Served, and then you could say, hey, no, this is actually a mocktail, it's not a cocktail.
Correct. Correct. That could very well be the result of our talking to the server, talking to the patron. They're both going to say the same thing in a hurry. So.
Are you handing out violations to the general public, members of the general public who are like
Patrons.
drunk and disorderly on the streets, who are like, like if someone's heavily intoxicated too?
Well, describe the situation.
Like if someone's stumbling out of a restaurant.
Right, and they're not causing any disturbance, then we'll find them a ride home, we'll find them a friend to look after them. But just being drunk in and of itself, without causing a disturbance, is not a crime in Massachusetts. Thank God it's not.
Can you just go over the responsibility for the people who are working, operating, or owning the establishment, that if someone comes into your establishment and they have been overserved somewhere else, what their responsibility is for that person? Because when they're in your establishment, my understanding is you own them.
You basically do own them,
Full effort to
right?
make sure that nothing happens to them.
Absolutely.
Not observed.
That's more of a civil than a criminal issue, but, the common sense with that would be is you certainly are responsible for them if they're on your premises. So if, like I said, sometimes people show up and they're fine, and then a half an hour later, you're like, what in the world happened there? And then what happened there was they did 5 shots before they walked into your front door. So, you certainly have some responsibility to make sure that they arrive home safe, or they're with some, and in most circumstances, custody of friends or.
I guess my question is, from a legal standpoint, you're the last establishment they're in, regardless of whether or not you serve them any alcohol, you are then the responsible party for making sure that the effort is made to make sure that they get home safe, that they're not driving, and that if an accident happens.
Right.
it's
Absolutely, but again, that's a civil, you'd be sued civilly, not criminally. It could potentially be criminally, but in most instances, as you just described, would be a civil lawsuit. Okay? What was going to be the last thing? Yes,
Explain them how they get selected to be
checked for this?
checked for
Right,
overserved.
right, so are we going to check for compliance in terms of over-serving at all of the license holders? The answer to that is probably no. Are we going to go into restaurants that maybe close at 10 to check for over-serving? Most likely, no. Are we going to go to establishments where we have information directly as a result of an incident that occurred outside of the premise, that we learn that over-serving occurred, and most likely in these instances are a result of the incident that we're addressing? So, for instance, 2 people fighting, completely overserved, we separate them, we learn that they just came from X bar or restaurant. Are we going to be going to that establishment to check for compliance? The answer is absolutely yes. We stop persons who are driving under the influence of alcohol, that are over the limit times 3. Are we going to ask them where they came from? Yes. When they tell us where that was, are we going to stop by that residence? We're going to stop by that establishment? The answer is absolutely yes. We're going to check for compliance. So those are going to be the triggers, as they were last year. They're going to be this year, to stop by your premises to make sure that compliance is happening. Okay? That's going to be sort of why and how we ended up there for compliance in terms of over-serving, not compliance as far as being under 21. See the big differences there? So basically what we're trying to do is, when we ended up with we ended up in the past, last season specifically, where a lot of incidences were coming from a single establishment, okay? A lot of incidents on the street were the result of over-serving at a single establishment or maybe two establishments. And so we're not going to continue to deal with the incidences, God forbid someone is then killed, right? Ignoring when we know where it's happening, we're going to attempt to go there and rectify the problem. Okay, so that's what this initiative is really about. Making sure that everyone gets home at the end of the night safe and, enjoyed a good time, not overserved and, they're not going to court on Monday. Okay, so that's sort of the motivation behind this. So it's tough, it's tricky. I understand that. And that's why I'm trying to explain to you how I explain to the sergeants who put forward to the patrolmen that will actually be doing this operation that they need to pay attention to some of the things you've mentioned, like a possible, Shirley Temple. Is that what you were referring to? Or the person who's overserved before they get there and they're not drinking. They're just in there. So we're gonna be careful to make sure we're doing this right because it's the right thing to do. Any questions with that? All right, thank you.
I just want to follow up with what Lieutenant McVicker was talking about as far as violations when these occur. If your establishment was found to serve someone underage or in the overserving situation, once you're notified and that process starts, I will notice the Board of Selectmen. I have to give them notice and notice you as well. In the Blue Book and the alcohol regulations, we outline currently what that is. So if it's your first time that this has happened, it'd be written warning. Again, when I talk about being tips trained, that's an important thing because if you're serving someone under 21 and that server is not properly trained, that's considered a violation too as well. So that would be up to second violation, which could be up to a 1 to 2 day suspension. You are then given the opportunity for a hearing in front of the Board of Selectmen to discuss what happened, the situation, and the circumstances surrounding that. So that's when that would be decided. And as it's been going now in the past couple of years, violation occurred on July the 7th, and it was found to have been a valid violation, and the Board of Selectmen vote on it. The closure, if was a violation, would be the same date the following year. That's kind of how we've done it. Whatever day you violated that next year is when that would occur, should that happen. So. And one other thing too, I didn't mention too, is with all the changes of ownership and things of that sort this year is redoing the numbers and just let everyone know kind of where we are in number of liquor licenses on this island. And we're at 97, which is a lot per capita. If we consider our seasonal, residents, we're probably in the top 10 or 20 of the state. And it's quite a large number. So we're at 50, our seasonal, the highest in the state by far of seasonal licenses, and 47 annual. So that's kind of the number we're dealing with right now in compliance for that. We're going to get into now the occupancy discussion. We have all been meeting. I understand this has been a long, confusing process, and we've all met together. We have health, fire, and building today to discuss all the elements that go into these numbers to explain to you that process and how we're going to move forward in that process in each step, everything that goes through. We're going to start right now with Health Department. Roberto Santamaria is here to discuss these requirements as far as bathrooms and the Board of Health and all of the things that have been going on the past couple of weeks. So if everyone we're going to give their presentation and then take questions.
Okay, let me just pull up my occupancy numbers here because they're confusing. All right, so with the health department, Roberto Santamaria, one of the things that, since we're going straight to occupancy, I'm going to try to keep this with occupancy, but I do want to touch up a quick thing on follow-up on what Mac Vickers said was about some of the compliance checks. The health department also does our own compliance checks for all of our regulations, rules and regulations, the state food code. So just by a quick show of hands, how many of you have already been visited by either Kathy or Hank this year? And those of you who haven't had your hands up, expect him. Hank will most likely be at your establishment 3 or 4 times this summer. We pride ourselves at being able to do a quick compliance check every week. Almost every establishment gets hit every month. So those are the quick ones, and the big ones, just by a quick overview: hats, gloves, hot holding, and cold holding. Those 4. We've issued already about $1,000 in fines since Memorial Day weekend. Hats, gloves, cold holding, hot holding. Can't express that enough. All right, so let me just go straight into the occupancy here. So what we've been hearing a lot recently, I don't know where to put this microphone, either up or down. We've been hearing a lot of the occupancy information about a regulation that the Board of Health granted a blanket variance for. This blanket variance is not what everyone's been hoping it will be. What it is more just the Board of Health said the state plumbing code has strict rules, much stricter than our local regulation, Regulation 14. So what we're going to do is we're going to grant a variance so that we bring that regulation down to the town regulation, which I'll explain in a minute, but until September 5th. So after September 5th, we still get back to the situation that we were here. So one of the things for everyone who is here and who's been signed in, you're duly informed. When September 5th comes along, we do revert back to the state plumbing code. And these issues are still going to be discussed again, and it is still going to be factored into occupancy limits. So what this regulation entailed, what this variance entailed was it moved down to Regulation 14. The Regulation 14 is available on the Nantucket, Massachusetts, the town's website under the health department, and on the bottom there is a medallion that says regulations. All of our regulations are listed there. Regulation 14 has a specific little chart that explains how many toilets and lavatories are needed for occupancy limit. And let me just go over the first 4 here. 20 to 25 people require a minimum of 1 water closet and 1 lavatory. Porta potties do not factor in here. No chemical toilets factor into this. It has to be a toilet with a sink that has hot water, cold water, soap, and paper towels, or a blow dry. 51 to 99 people need 2 water closets and 2 lavatories. 100 to 149, 3 water closets, 3 lavatories. 150 to 200, 4 water closets, 4 lavatories. You kind of see the pattern here. It's an extra toilet and lavatory per 50 occupants. So this regulation that we granted a variance brings you down to this. So I know some people have lowered their own occupancy to meet certain levels. This is just one of the factors that goes into the overarching occupancy load that will be touched upon by building and fire. So just a real quick and dirty aspect is what we'll be doing is we'll be going in and taking a look at the toilets, how many toilets you have, checking you for compliance with our town regulation, with the Board of Health regulation. And then at the same time, there are some people who have leases with toilets that, for example, are across the hall. For example, we've seen that. Those are allowed, but you have to have rights to use that bathroom. So far, only 1 restaurant has shown us an exclusive lease with a bathroom that is across the way to their Chapter 91 license. Only 1 person has done that. So it's one of those things. If you tell us the bathroom's across the hall, show us in your lease that you can use that bathroom, or else we're not going to count it for compliance. And really, Other than that, we're going to check for it for cleanliness. If you have that lease, even if it is a public bathroom under Chapter 91, you're still responsible for cleaning it. It is your establishment's toilet now. So you have to have soap in it, hot water, cold water, towels, a working blow dryer if you have one, and make sure the floors are clean. There was a sewage backup this last week. We'll just throw it there. If there was an issue with any sewer water coming out, call us immediately because we need to inspect. You close immediately because we need to inspect and make sure that that gets cleaned and disinfected. If you stay open, like the restaurant that we just caught, you will get a fine up to 4 times the amount of your permit. So for some of you that have a $300 permit, expect a $1,200 fine from us if you don't follow the rule and regulation here. So the only reason I bring it up is because it just happened. So I would actually just finish it off here. I know mine was a little bleak and dark, but unfortunately, health is never happy. So we are the fun police. Stephen.
Marco, I have 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
I'll let you break the first one into 2 parts. One is, what about grandfathering for older establishments that have less bathrooms? And related to that is, so what about, is there a difference between bathrooms that might not have code issues, that might have like head height issues and those kind of things for the Board of Health? And then separately from that, what happens on September 5th?
So as far as the health department is concerned, we only enforce the one regulation, Rule 14. So a lot of the grandfathered ones, the one with the older, lower amounts of toilets, to our knowledge, not a single restaurant actually fails Regulation 14. So to the health department's concerned, you have nothing to worry about there. None of the restaurants that I know of fail Regulation 14. And if we run into a situation that you do, you are allowed to apply for a variance from any town regulation, any Board of Health regulation that we have. It is Regulation 90. We have it on the books. Every regulation that we pass is subject to a special variance. So if you need that grandfathering process or something like that, let's say you have one toilet, but you have 52 people in your occupancy, I'm sure the Board of Health would be amenable to something like that. So just apply and discuss it at a Board of Health meeting. It has to be done at an open hearing, and then we would probably grant or deny the variance depending on the situation. The second part, the head height issue, that is actually not a Board of Health issue as long as you have access to the bathrooms. Access is including all the occupants as well as your employees. So if you have a bathroom upstairs that's for employees only, well, you better have a bathroom available for the public as well. So those do get factored in. If you say this is just an employees only and you only have 14 employees, well, those 14 does not count to the overall occupancy for the public. Then what was the second question again? I'm sorry.
What happens on September 5th?
And on September 5th, so what happens on September 5th is we do revert back to the plumbing code. So at that plumbing code, you can once again apply for the same variance that was applied for. Variances, it was a lot of them. So you can apply for those variances again. However, don't expect the board to just issue the blanket variance again. This is an issue, this is a law. And if we just keep varying a law, then it's no longer a law, is it? So keep in mind that the state regulations, including the food regulations, are a minimum standard. Do you really want to go below the minimum standard? Do we want to be substandard here on Nantucket? So once we revert back to the plumbing code, we will be working. We're not trying to hammer anybody. The health department's not trying to hammer anyone. I'm sure the building department's not trying to hammer anyone. Maybe fire. No, the fire department's not trying to hammer anyone. It's just we're trying to work with everyone here. I understand that income might be an issue. I understand that it's expensive to get into compliance. But the plumbing code is not new. The plumbing code is something that has to be complied with. the plumbing code, the health code, the housing code, the building code. These are all codes that are written for health and safety issues. So we will work with people to bring them as close to compliance as possible. But every case will have to be taken care of one by one. Kevin, and I know there was a question in the back as well.
Roberto, will the Board of Health or the building commissioner issue that state variance under 248 CMR under the plumbing code? And if not, what steps will you take and the Board of Health take and the building commissioner take to get the authority to issue that state variance?
So right off the bat, the Board of Health never has the authority to vary the plumbing code. We only have an authority to issue a letter of non-opposition or a letter of recommendation to the State Plumbing Board of Gas Fitters and Pipe Fitters. If that state board wants to delegate an authority to a local agent, then we will probably be able to vary at that point. But as of right now, the Board of Health does not have that authority. We can only issue a recommendation.
What steps, affirmative steps, will you take down so that that board of examiners, of plumbers and gas fitters delegates to you and the local Board of Health the authority to issue that variance? Will you affirmatively move that way?
No, the Board of Health nor the agent of the Board of Health, we're not experts in the plumbing code. You don't want us providing variances into the plumbing code. What you want that agent to be is either the plumbing inspector, the building inspector, and somebody who has expertise in this. You don't want a police officer doing your job as a lawyer. You don't want a building inspector doing my job as a sanitarian. The expertise, the variance, and the agent has to be given to those with the expertise.
You know full well this issue about fixtures and toilets and bathrooms. It doesn't take expertise in the plumbing code to understand that. Nantucket is unique. This affects a large number of restaurants. What I think I'm looking for, and some of the other people here are looking for, is leadership.
I know what you're looking for, Kevin, but I'm not going to accept the responsibility for a plumbing code that I do not have expertise on. Whether I have expertise on it or not is not the issue here. The agent, me as the agent of the Board of Health, you are asking me to accept liability over something that I do not have expertise on, and I will not do that.
Excuse me, what about asking the state board to delegate the authority to our plumbing inspector to issue that variance?
That is something we can definitely look into, absolutely.
Will you follow up and ask for it?
I will follow up internally, yes. There was a question here, and then I'll get over to you, Stephen.
You mentioned something about porta johns, that they would be legal code. I just didn't know Massachusetts portable toilet rentals have to, where they have hot water, cold water, hand dryers, regular those.
It would be on a case-by-case basis. Our regulation only bans chemical toilets. It would have to be, like you said, hot water, cold water, whole 9 yards. We only ban chemical toilets. It would definitely be a case-by-case basis. You would have to be able to prove that it's connected to a sewer or a septic system, or it's getting constantly pumped, on a daily basis. Something that'll make sure that it's being kept like that. Then you would have to still apply for the variance, but it's something that's more likely to be considered or approved in that situation. Stephen.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused. And first I want to say I support Kevin's basic point that having local authority to get some of these waivers would be really important to understand that can all fall on the Board of Health or you, and that should be in conjunction with the plumbing inspector and the building inspector. But trying to have restaurant owners go to the State Board of Boston is an incredible burden.
It's a huge burden.
I think that a lot of people would appreciate the town trying to get that localized authority. But my question actually is, you said that the Board of Health has issued a variance of the state plumbing code and so down to the local regulation through September 5th, but then you said you can't grant variances, so I'm a little confused by that. Can you clarify that?
I know. The action that was taken on the Board of Health is unenforceable. And as a result, it does become a recommendation by default. because we cannot vary the state code.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that you think that all of the local restaurants essentially meet the local code, but many of them
Yes.
may not meet the state code and need to get a state waiver, and that is not currently locally available, right?
As of right now, it is not currently locally available. The question, sorry for on TV, was asked that I repeat. The question was, right now, most of the restaurants, if not all the restaurants, meet the local code, but they do not meet the state code. And as of right now, the way it's set up is that people would have to end up and apply for the variance from the state code to the Boston Board of Plumbers and Gas Fitters, which is right now an undue burden. And I agree, it is definitely an undue burden. And we are looking to get a local agent appointed by that. It is not going to be the health department. But we are looking to get a local agent.
Is there a date of grandfathering for the state plumbing code that would be applicable, I think, to many of these restaurants?
Not that I know of. If there is a date, the question is there a date of grandfathering? Not that I know of. To my knowledge, once the code gets changed and if there's any sort of change with the building, occupancy, anything like that, you do have to enforce the code as it stands now. But I'll let the building department respond to something along those lines. But to my knowledge, there is no grandfathering in the plumbing code. Sarah.
What is the timing on getting someone locally approved? Okay. And is the Board of Health now aware that they need to give a recommendation or a non-opposition motion for someone who wants to go to the state? Because there were establishments who asked for such recommendation, and that was not, it didn't seem to be understood. And wasn't granted or denied.
No, absolutely. When the board gave what they called the blanket variance, that automatically defaults as a letter of support. What I can do is definitely put it on the agenda for the Board of Health. The question was, does the Board of Health understand that the vote that they took granting a variance will also need to be changed over to a recommendation. To my knowledge, the way it works, the Board of Plumbers and Gas Fitters will accept that as a recommendation, just with the minutes of the Board of Health. But at the same time, because we gave that blanket situation, you can come to my office and I can get you a decision letter that says on such and such date, the board voted to say yes to this variance request. And then past those lines, yes, the Board of Health has been made aware of what is going on. And as far as a timing goes, if there's any more variances that need to be done, you just need to submit a variance request to the Board of Health a week before the Board of Health meeting, and you'll be on the next meeting.
Do you have a sense on timing on getting someone locally authorized to do this?
I do not have a sense of that right now. Sorry. I do not know when a local agent will be approved, if the state will even allow it. That's still preliminary, unfortunately. Yes, sir.
Question. So if I followed it, the Board of Health issued a blanket variance. It really wasn't a variance. They probably didn't have the authority to issue it as it relates to state building code. And that variance is going to expire on September 5th.
Yes.
So if a restaurant operator wants to be careful, they should be seeking a state plumbing inspector variance to protect themselves by September 5th, because on September 5th, they may not get any further relief. So they have to get a non-opposition letter from you, plus have a filing in and have that done and ready to be heard by September 5th, or they risk going into violation on September 6th. Now, is that all true, roughly?
Let me just jump in here because we seem to be getting a little confused. This question of bathroom is only applicable when you seek to increase your occupancy. So if you're operating now within the numbers that are found on your COI, then the bathroom issue is not an issue. You will not be in violation of the code because you are grandfathered. So we're looking as part of the increase in occupancy numbers as one of the components, do you have sufficient bathrooms? I certainly am not looking at it now, and I don't believe any of the enforcement angle of things are looking at the number of bathrooms now. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Mark, I don't want to jump ahead too much to Steve's part of this, but I think that probably everybody
We overlap.
is thinking that my number is wrong, my number is low, my number is based on almost nothing, and then the town is telling me I need to come into compliance, and by the way, when I come into compliance, now it's being counted as an addition, where it can increase, and I'm getting stuck with all these code upgrades. And so I think even though what Mr. Butler said is true, it is not necessarily a correct characterization from the restaurant owner's point of view, and a lot of people are now stuck in this pickle because 25 years ago, some ridiculous number was stuck on a card and couldn't carry it forward. So it's not like someone's coming in and trying to increase their occupancy beyond what it ever really has been, but now they're getting stuck with code compliance. So I think the town needs to have some policy in place that treats an increase differently than a correction of bad paperwork, because that's what I think we have in the room is mostly a lot of bad paperwork.
Well, regardless of whether it's bad paperwork or anything like that, any of these sort of things, the plumbing code is not new. And it's the same situation as if we were to be driving off island going 55 miles on a 30-mile-an-hour road that's not posted. It's still a 30-mile-an-hour road, and you can still get a ticket for going 20 over. As you know, as an attorney, the ignorance of the law is not a defense against the law. Just because the enforcement of the plumbing code didn't happen 25 years ago doesn't mean it was not still in effect. We're just now getting to a level of enforcement that, quite frankly, has been asked for by the public. We've both in septic systems and water quality, and now that we're actually enforcing it and enforcing it correctly, we're getting pushback.
Right. So I think the difference is, and I apologize, I don't mean to get into back and forth, but I think the difference is that the correction of an incorrect number is being treated as an increase, and that is triggering code compliance that it shouldn't be, or that I don't think it should be.
No, and that's understandable. That's absolutely understandable. And like I said, as far as we're looking into, as far as enforcement, we're not trying to hammer anybody. We're not trying to just force people to do a bunch of things here. It's always a case-by-case basis, but definitely come into our office and talk to us. We are available to have discussions. We are available to have these meetings with you. We are civil servants.
So do you or the building inspector have the authority to determine that the correction of a number is not necessarily an increase in occupancy, and therefore no increased code compliance is being triggered?
I do not have that authority to set that. I'll let the next presenters.
All right, we can save it for Steve's work.
Yeah. And then I know Don had a question, then I'll be right back to you.
I was just wondering about the process.
Yes.
As far as the state, do we have any idea how long that takes? And do you have to apply in person? Can you just send out documentation after you're heard? Do they make a decision immediately? Does it take weeks or months?
That is actually an excellent question. Excellent question, Don. The question was asked was, what is the process and how long does it take? With the Plumbers and Gas Fitters Board, as well as our process here. In my experience, depending on the application, for example, an underground injection control or an underground storage tank for a mechanics repair shop didn't need to be done in person. All they needed was the letter of non-opposition from the Board of Health, and then they were able to get that. They were able to get that variance within the week. To my knowledge, they meet every 2 weeks. And then it just goes from there. So from my experience with the Plumbers and Gas Fitting Board, it is very fast. From the moment they get to be honest with you, the bottleneck and the choke point is the Board of Health, because we only meet once a month. So once you get to us and you get that letter of non-opposition or a letter of support or a letter of opposition, in which case you shouldn't bother, once you get the letter of non-opposition, it's actually a really fast process.
So essentially, that was already voted.
Yes.
Get that now.
Yes.
And there's stuff up to the state.
Yes. Yes. In
Potentially have
essence,
within 3 weeks.
in essence, you already have a letter of non-opposition from the Board of Health. If you need a specific letter on letterhead from the Board of Health, feel free to contact me in my office and we can get something like that for you. But from our experience, the minutes are more than enough. And then you submit that to the plumbers and gas fitters. If they need more information or if they need you to be present, they will ask you to be present. But from my experience with them, basic regulations where the town, the local approving authority has already said no problem, they will grant without even you having to be there. Yes, Kevin.
Just a point of clarification, Roberto.
Yes, sir.
Is it your opinion that the plumbing code requirement as to toilets and lavatories and fixtures applies irrespective of any grandfathering?
In my personal opinion, when codes are changed to be updated, it is a point of evolution. They are updating because of the way the modern society has gone. So if they make it more strict, I have to believe that they are doing that out of good evidence and good practice. So yes, it should be enforced, in my opinion, without grandfathering. But at the same time, if the board feels that we should have variances and they have given that blanket variance, I will definitely respect the decision of my board.
So the point is that if a 30 or 40-year-old restaurant has an inadequate number of bathrooms under the current state plumbing code, they're not grandfathered and they need a variance.
Correct. As of right now, a restaurant that is 40 years old, 50 years old, and has 2 bathrooms and they have 100 occupants or 200 occupants, they would need the variance.
Whether or not there's an increase in occupancy.
In my opinion, whether or not there's an increase in occupancy to make sure you are in compliance.
So you differ from the building inspector.
I always err on the side of caution. It is the nature of the work that I do. Any more questions? All right, thank you very much. Oh, yes, sir.
So with the state variance and getting a letter of recommendation, to John's point, saying that we already have that based on the variance that was issued, blanket variance or recommendation, would that need to be made permanent in order to get from the state?
The letter of non-opposition from us, I know the recommendation that was given expires on September 5th or something like that. If you apply anytime between now and 3 years from now, I'm sure the board's opinion most likely won't change. So it is easier to just, after September 5th, technically, you do have to come back to the board and ask for that same variance because of the technical aspect of us putting an expiration date on it. So yes, you would have to go to the September meeting or the October meeting or whatever to get a renewed letter of non-opposition.
I guess my point is if local board of health is making this recommendation, why not make it permanent so that we have the time, especially if all these restaurants are going to go to the state to try to deal with the situation, so that they have the ability and time, or that even the recommendation comes from that.
The letter of non-opposition you get from us, as long as you haven't changed your property, let's say you're not adding a dining room or anything like that, when you get that letter from my office, it is permanent. It is a letter of non-opposition as your restaurant stands right now. If you decide to add 50 occupants, then that letter is no longer active. So what we would do is we would say, we do recommend this under the occupancy of whatever on day whatever of this year. So as long as you haven't changed your restaurant, that letter should be fine. Okay. Yes, Sarah.
I'm confused about the terminology you're using.
Yes.
Are you saying the Board of Health is giving a recommendation, a positive recommendation, or simply a recommendation of no opposition? There's no difference.
As of right now, I think we're giving just a positive recommendation. The vote that they said was a positive recommendation. They feel that as of right now, there was no reason to really push a really strict adherence to the code. So they are giving a positive recommendation based on restaurants that have already been operating the same way for the past 30 years. So it is a positive recommendation. But the Board of Plumbers and Gas Fitters asks for the three types, either a letter of no opposition, in which case they make a decision based on their evidence and what they see, and they say, okay, the town isn't really dealing with it. It doesn't really want to deal with it right now. Letter of opposition, they'll most likely deny it. A letter of positive recommendation, a lot of times with a letter of recommendation, they don't even hear it. They just automatically accept it. That's been my experience with them. Yes, sir.
So the grandfather, following the grandfather issue, if I understand it correctly, I need to apply to the state, but I can get a letter from you if there's not opposition to go through the process and then apply there.
Yes. Yes. So the application for the grandfathering for the people at home and recording, the process would be definitely to get the variance from the State Board of Plumbers and Gas Fitters in this situation. But you would get a letter of either no opposition or recommendation from us at the Board of Health. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to switch it around a little bit, and we're going to get right into the building commissioner's presentation and questions. And what I have up behind us and also on the website is kind of a drilling down of the letter as far as the process for increasing the occupancy and making these changes so that we have some of this documented for you, the process. So he'll talk about that. We'll follow up then with the fire department and discuss the inspections and how some of these numbers will be applied in that sense. So I'll leave it to Steve Butler.
Good morning. As far as where the numbers came from on your current COIs, I'm not exactly sure. They could very well have been right at one time when they were put down there. And over the course of time, things have evolved. Your business has evolved, and the numbers have increased accordingly. Nantucket's evolved, certainly from the sleepy little town it was that many years ago. And our enforcement has evolved. Fortunately, I don't do any inspections on the site. I don't do the spot checks that everybody else does. I'm just the paper pusher to make sure that the numbers that these gentlemen look at when they go to do their inspections are correct. And as part of that process, I have a bunch of things that I need to look at. I don't really make the value judgments on whether or not the Board of Health's approvals are correct. And where they came from, it's just the fact that the Board of Health said, this is what it is, that's what it is. So just like the evaluations that are done by your engineer or your architect when they're looking at your building, they're doing the analysis that I briefly outlined here. It's a little complicated, as is the process. But I look at that and see if it complies with the code. And that sets your number. It's probably easier for me to take some questions rather than to give you a spiel, so fire away. Kevin.
Steve, first, following up on Steve Cohen's comments, if the certificate of inspection numbers are inaccurate based on the formula to determine occupancy level, would it not make sense to make those numbers accurate before you do anything else? In other words, why not use the formula in the building code to determine occupancy load based on square footage and put those numbers in revised certificates of inspection for each restaurant, then determine whether or not there's an increase in occupancy or not, and use those numbers as the benchmark for enforcement. It seems to me to be that's a pretty straightforward way of correcting the situation. I know Chief Pittman said, well, we rely on the COI numbers no matter what, but what if they're wrong?
Well, it's
Can they
certainly
be corrected? And secondly, how do you correct them now?
it would certainly be expeditious. Unfortunately, that is not my, it's beyond my authority. The numbers on the certificate of inspection are a legal number, and they have been such. I cannot unilaterally change those. I have discussed this with my district state inspector, and that is not within my authority without the building owner going through the applicable process. And that process is spelled out within the building code, and it's not a linear description within the code, but I've tried to outline some of the points that I need and some of the things that I require to have first the building profession, the design professional that's employed by the owner of the building to do a specific evaluation of the building, and then for me to review that to determine whether or not that number is correct. But I cannot unilaterally say, oh, this is all of these COIs for the last 25 years have been incorrect, and unilaterally change it. I'm not permitted to do that.
If the building professional, the designer engaged by the owner provides you with certified and stamped plans to show that the current occupancy load of the restaurant in question is X, will you take that number and revise the COI to reflect that?
After a review of all the applicable laws and a review of whatever other compliance things that he needs to do, yes, and I have done that a few times in some of the easier restaurants that have come in for an occupancy change. There are design professionals out there who have gone through the process. I have increased occupancy numbers for a few restaurants who have gone through the process. I sent out my first letter on this over 2 years ago to try to get a handle on the situation. Then again, last year with more detail and trying to get people to come on board as a response to the various and other enforcement agencies. I've been trying to give them the correct number to enforce.
I don't mean to belabor this, but first of all, I don't think you're talking about an increase in occupancy. You're talking about correcting erroneous information on the COIs when you do it. But what is the process? It may be complicated and it may be difficult, but I think it's really important to clarify to the public what is the process to get the right occupancy load numbers on the COIs?
Sure. First of all, there may be I'm not going to belabor the point, but the number is the number on the COI, however it arrived at. In order to change that, I have to have a registered design professional draw me a set of plans that show me the conditions in the building, and looking at the table in the building code, determine the number of occupants per space. The building also has to be evaluated under the existing buildings provision to whether or not it can physically handle the load structurally, whether that is both the structure of the building itself. If you had a floor where there were once 40 people, now you're going to put 140, well, that changes the floor load. And there are circumstances where that building may be 120 years old, designed as a single-family dwelling. Now you're supercharging the floor loading. That needs to be evaluated. You have second floor exits that, again, designed for a single-family dwelling and now have 100 people in it. So there are all of these factors that need to be considered that are building specific. That is what that design professional is going to evaluate for me. Some of the points are highlighted in this document. They're going to tell me that, yes, the building can physically handle it. It has enough emergency lights, it has enough exits, and exit signs and passive travel. Another part of that is the number of bathrooms. Again, that there's a recourse for that, and as long as that is satisfied, then there are the part of the bathroom issue is the accessibility issue. when the Board of Health waives bathrooms, does it take consideration that they're waiving accessible bathrooms as well? So that's a component that I've talked to the state about, and that the state is concerned, the accessibility board is concerned that if they start waiving bathrooms in large numbers, that they're essentially short-circuiting the disabled community, because now there's no possibility of having accessible bathrooms. So this problem is multi-layered.
I understand, but what you're saying.
But the next part of it is are you changing the occupancy classification of the building? Are you going from a building that was a B use where there are certain requirements to an assembly use where there are additional requirements? Once you're over 100 occupants in an assembly use, you now have to sprinkle the building. So if you're currently at 97 occupants, you go to 103, you have to sprinkle the building.
I understand, but let's focus for a minute on use groups. If the COI numbers are too low and bad numbers, and that restaurant is classified in use group B, and you review a plan for occupancy load based on square footage, and you see that the occupancy load of that building is in excess of 50, not fewer than 50, that's not, in my view, that's not a change of classification from B to A. It's a correction. And I think part of the issue here is focusing on correcting bad information rather than the default position, which is everything you do to change the use group or the number of persons in their occupants is an increase.
I've asked that specific question of my state inspector, and I do not have the authority to do that. If you are aggrieved by that, you can go to the state Building Code Appeals Board, but I simply do not have the authority to do that.
You don't have the authority to reclassify.
I have the authority to classify.
The information is bad.
Not on this specific, the way you're framing it, and no, that's the short answer. Anybody else? Steve.
Steve, I think that part of the problem that we have with a lot of these numbers being inaccurate is that a lot of them were based on old zoning and entertainment permits that were essentially trying to get parking waivers, which are not longer applicable in the downtown area, and have nothing to do with the load or the actual occupancy or any of those kind of things. But a lot of times the zoning board would say you could have 70 seats, and that 70 seats was then entered in as 70 occupants in the COI, and that's been sitting there for 30 years, even though it is a, totally inaccurate and not applicable number. What I'm hearing you say is that if someone comes in with a building that's been there for 40 years and they haven't changed a thing, but now they're going with the square footage number and the other building code issues that you've laid out, that's going to be considered an increase, and that because the card was never actually correct, and that increase needs a variance from the state board in order to avoid having to come into compliance?
I don't know about the variance part, but yes, I am locked into that number that is on the COI. And in order to increase that number, you have to go through the procedure to increase that. And that is a application that contains the documentation that shows that you comply with the building code, that you comply with the health code, that you comply with zoning, and all the other applicable codes. And I basically look at the documentation that's prepared and make the determination that it's complying with all the applicable codes, and then I'm permitted to increase that number. And that is the only way I'm permitted to increase that number.
Even if nothing has changed in the building, seeking to upgrade, seeking to correct the number without having all the code upgrades to go with it requires a state waiver?
Again, I'm not so sure about the state waiver aspect of it, but
Well, if I would build, this was my dining room, right? And 40 years ago, I was using this as my dining room. And because of the
That's essentially correct.
Okay, even though nothing's changed.
Well, the number on the certificate has changed, and again, I'm bound by that number, and the owner of the building is also bound by that number. So the responsibility of the building owner is to have made those changes over time. So it's not. Nobody was paying attention.
Right.
And unfortunately, now people are paying attention, and we're trying to make this process as orderly as possible and as painless as possible.
Well,
But there are constrictions. I can only do so much.
I don't know if that's the case, but
Right.
is there any? I just want to confirm. There's no discretion at your level. You're saying there's no discretion at your level. If the number changes one, then they need to go to the state board to try and get a waiver, or they need to come into compliance.
There are within the building code, there are certain trigger points, but there is also some degree of flexibility. I have a very limited authority in consultation with my state inspector as to whether or not modifications are granted. But basically speaking, if the trigger point is reached, I have little option.
So, separate question. I just want to confirm. Is it a correct or incorrect statement that there are two important numbers, probably three important numbers? The first number is your room occupancy. The second number is your seating, which is a smaller number. And the third number is any adjustments to the first two that might be applicable because of zoning or bathrooms or permitting or whatever. Is that accurate?
Well, let me flesh it out a little bit. Let me flesh it out a little bit. There is the total number of occupants, and that includes employees. And that's based on square footages of the various areas and how, basically how things fall within the building. Then there is the restriction that may be placed upon by zoning that would limit your number of seats. And traditionally, zoning does not include the employees. They may list it for various parking waivers, then limit to X number of seats and then X number of employees for the purposes of parking. That's been eliminated. So that throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into things when it comes to try to describing the occupants. But a properly posted building would have each individual room posted as to the number of occupancies. That occupancy number can be divided two ways. One, with tables and chairs. The other, which is becoming more common, is after a certain hour of the evening, the tables and chairs gets pushed aside to some degree, and then that area is used for bar or other entertaining. That's a separate number on the building code. So what I'm trying to do, and again, this is an evolutionary process, is to put on the COIs in some cohesive form the number under both circumstances. So you have 75 people for when you're sitting having dining, and you have 100 people when you're standing around having drinks, shooting the breeze after dinner. I'm striving to get that occupancy number posted in each individual room. The other part of your question?
Well, so I think that there's maybe a confusion there because most restaurants tend to have a seating area and then a bar area that might have.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I think the confusion is the difference between occupancy and seating, and the enforcement has been a little spotty on enforcing seating as occupancy. And I think that the clarification on that would be really helpful.
Right. The bar is a good example. Some of these restaurants have separate bar areas, and to put a bar area which is strictly standing is going to get one number. A bar area that has tables and chairs is going to have another number. again, if that striving to have each room labeled as to occupancy, that bar area would, if it's only standing, have then one number. But if it has tables and chairs moved around after a certain hour, it would have two numbers. And that occupancy would be including employees. The only time that we would have a restriction, if it has a zoning restriction that says it can only have X number of people. But under the building code, I have to, or the building designer has to have the proper number of exits, signs, and the building is designed for a life safety measure based on the highest number, which is the occupancy number.
So people can apply for and obtain COIs that have two numbers, seating number and an occupancy.
Yeah. Again, it's as a broad statement, each building's going to be slightly different, but the effort is to try to get the most accurate numbers to each individual area. So when the PD comes or fire comes and they see a crowd, they can look at that and say, okay, you have X number of people in this space. Yeah.
I only get an occupancy number, I don't get a seating number.
Right.
If my occupancy number is more than that I need, I'm happy with it. But it doesn't fall in line with the bathroom issue, then I need to get the variance. And I'm happy with the number that my occupancy is, but I still should apply for the variance on the bathroom, you know, that's it, has always been that way.
That was news to me this morning, so that aspect of things I don't know. I have to find that out. My understanding was that in instances where somebody does not seek an increase in the number of occupants, then that makes my day. I just issue the COI, be on your way. And the fact that it may or may not be, my understanding was it was compliant with all codes, and that there wasn't a reach back on the plumbing in particular, but I definitely find that out.
The second question, the sprinkler requirement is over 100, is that correct?
Correct.
How does the patio play into that?
The patio, I tell you. When that's when the patio becomes part of the structure, and then it gets factored into the building itself. So you have to do an individual evaluation. If it is a temporary structure. Temporary structure has a specific definition under the building code. That does not require to be sprinkled. If it is a permanent structure and the building itself with the evaluation is required to be sprinkled, then it has to be sprinkled. So it's an evaluation. There are circumstances where a permanent awning has to be sprinkled, absolutely. And there are circumstances where it doesn't. Chief?
So if a person has a building that's got 75 occupancy certificate, and they have a patio that's got 25, in total they can have 100 people on their premises, right? What if those 25 in a patio go inside now, where there's 100 people inside? Wouldn't that be a violation?
Correct. What we're trying to do is we're trying to post the individual areas. Most of the places with patios have, for the last several years, had the patio listed separately, and the inside. What I'm trying to do is get the individual rooms, because we're individual spaces, because that's where we're finding the problem, and I think that will help alleviate some of the problem. Yes.
The question goes back to the both Kevin's point about correction over, what you said, the COI and the COI. Some of us have had the instance where our COI said seats, if they go through all the stuff that you're asking, it's not, they have the, basement egress, the square footage, have the room to have, a different occupant. But at this present moment, it's still, the seat number got changed, not by the restaurateurs, but by the building department at some point.
Right. Well, I'll own that because that was an attempt at clarification, and that was an attempt to include bar seats and all the people that would be standing around to differentiate between the employees and the number of people. And sometimes that's has to do with the zoning restriction or other things like that. But that's one of these things, is trying to find the right handle, the right label to describe where it is. Because, I mean, if I was to go strictly on the building code, it's quite easy. It's just, these are the number of occupants, you guys sort it out. But because there are restrictions on zoning and there are other issues to deal with, just, again, trying to find the right term to use to differentiate the bar area, the standing people, all of that. And I think as I've been going through the administrative process and trying to determine what information exactly is required on a plan, as I've tried to outline on this sheet here, and labeling individual rooms and spaces for the number of occupancy, that should be a little bit clearer, because when you have a bar area and then you have an area over to the side where your reception is, and you might have 25 people in there waiting for a table. Well, under the building code, those guys are considered occupants, and they need to be able to safely out of the building. Under zoning, not so much. So it's a question of nomenclature. Yeah.
Maybe a simple question, but under required documentation, it says completed application. Is there an updated form?
I'm working on it.
So there's no form yet?
Yeah, right now I'm accepting letters, but this thing has come on kind of hard and fast, because I've been trying to, do this for the last couple of years, but now it's kind of, frankly, blown up. But I do take if I have a letter, and as I've done it before, that that identifies the restaurant, gives me the map and parcel number, the owner gives me the pertinent information, that may very well be the application. I just put that down to try to get my administrative head in order. If somebody walked in with an absolutely spot-on application, which unfortunately is highly unlikely, a week or so. I mean, we have a little bit of a lull at the moment. Unfortunately, I would like to catch up on about a dozen other things. But yeah, I mean, it's something that I have been able to do. Oh, without question. That's the review to determine whether or not the application is complete, or to determine whether or not certain things need to be corrected, probably a week to 10 days. And then it's on them to, if they have to go to the state Building Code Board of Appeals, or if they have to have a sprinkler system design, or if they have to go to the planning board because now they're an MCD or they're a pre-existing MCD and they need relief, well, that's outside of any timeline. Chief.
So if you had to give one recommendation to somebody out here that's planning on increasing their occupancy, what would it be? How should they start the process?
The first process would be to go out interview design professionals who are competent in this. I'm perfectly happy talking to restaurant owners, but frankly, it's not very productive because at my end of things, it's pretty technical, and that requires a design professional to look after your best interests, to evaluate your building, and to give me the documentation and the plans required so I can take a look at it. I mean, the really good news is really once it's done, and we won't have to go through this again next year. Kevin?
Again, I'm just trying to get some clarification. If I understand how far along we've come, first, any restaurant that doesn't comply with the state plumbing code with respect to bathrooms, whether or not they're grandfathered, has to get a variance from the State Board of Examiners and Plumbers Gas Boards.
That's new news to me.
That's what Roberto
Right. I am,
said to me.
okay. That's new news to me.
Whether or not the information is wrong, erroneous, whatever, the only way to change and correct a certificate of inspection, whether or not you're increasing occupancy, the only way to change it is to go to the State Building Code Appeals Board.
No.
Is that what you said?
No. What I'm saying is that if you cannot comply with the various requirements of the building code, or you think I am flat out wrong, then you can go to the Building Code Board of Appeals. But no, that you can certainly, the building code, specifically the existing building code, was designed to allow buildings to be used and modified over time. So it's, again, it's a little complicated, but it sets forth a procedure to allow that.
Let me refine my second question. If your certificate of inspection misclassifies your use group and puts you in a use group B on the assumption that there are 49 or fewer occupants, and that's dead wrong based on square footage and everything else, to reclassify from use group B to use group A requires the state procedure before the...
No, it does not.
So how do you do it?
Would you like your specific example answered? Because I can answer your specific example. When that building came to change from an M use to a restaurant, the code at the time said if you were an A use, you had to be sprinkled.
Yes.
And that number of an A use at that time was 50. Rather than sprinkle the building, the inspector at the time said, okay, you can have 49 occupants. We won't count the employees because we'll just say we'll give you 49. We'll give you a B use. You don't have to sprinkle the building, and take it and run. Now you're stuck with the B use. If you want to go to an A use, an A2, when you're over 100, you have to sprinkle. So the codes increase the permissible number of occupants before you have to sprinkle. But there are other requirements within the building code when you go from a B to an A. The job of the registered design professional is to identify those changes, tell me what they are, as part of a permit, make those say, okay, I have to, for example, increase the size of the door. I have to put panic bars on the door. I now have to have 2 means of egress where I only had to have 1. I'm going to make these specific changes pursuant to a building permit to do a change in occupancy classification from a B to an A. And my number of occupants is going to be less than 100, so I don't have to sprinkle the building. So there is a specific procedure.
You can do that.
I can do that because you're code compliant. Barring, of course, you got any zoning considerations.
So get the number straight. We don't have to go to the state. We just want to correct them, not to increase, it's just a correction on our
again,
I guess we're looking for clarification.
yeah, I because things are reasonably specific and building specific, I can't, but when things comply with the building code, with the straight up code, that I can do. That may or may not always be possible, but I would think, from a kind of a generic answer, if you've got a occupancy number of 110 and the right number is 108 or 107, that's pretty easy. If your number is 98 and you want to go to 110, well, that gets a little bit more difficult because there's zoning factors and there's just building code factors. Rick?
I think the frustrating part about this for me, and I think for a lot of restaurant owners, is that you're talking about an increase of the COI when there are a lot of restaurants here that have a lower COI number, right? And if they hire an architect, they're going to get a potentially higher number, but then on top of that are going to have to potentially make some expensive building improvements. And so that's really the frustrating part about that. I don't think anybody has a problem with it if they want to increase occupancy, paying an architect and paying to increase that occupancy. That's part of the ballgame. But it's really unfair to the restaurants who aren't doing anything, aren't seeking to change anything about their establishment, yet you're calling it an increase. And yet at the same time, you're saying, you have no idea how the numbers got the way they got. I've changed some things on the COI. And so it seems the town bears a little bit of the responsibility for having what is, I think, an inaccurate number. I think that's what some of the people here are getting at. I mean, shouldn't you, in that instance, okay, where someone brings you what you call an increase of occupancy, but they're not changing anything, because we all know who the restaurants are, right? Compared to you, I've been on Nantucket about 5 minutes. You know which restaurants haven't changed in a number of years. I know what they are. For those restaurants, isn't it fair? Shouldn't you make a blanket support to those restaurants up in Boston if they need those kind of expensive improvements?
Well, if it comes to the variance proceedings, I can certainly, as I've done before the Building Code Board of Appeals several times, given my opinion, in my professional opinion as the inspector of buildings. That's a slightly different issue than whether or not it's an increase or not. I mean, I have, again, a limited authority to, or practically no authority to change that document unless follows the proper compliance path. Steve?
Your letter from 2 years ago, which I know everybody in the room has read 500 times probably and cried over it. If I could paraphrase it, basically said is, we're looking for building code and fire safety plans. Please submit a floor plan showing your tables and occupancy number. Don't worry, we're not trying to shut anybody down. We're just trying to get everything organized because it's like no paperwork in the building department and we need it for health and safety issues. And I think that, the town and you should be doing that. But what we're running into is actually, now all the pigs have to be kosher, and it's unfair to all these people who have to bear tens of thousands of dollars in architectural and engineering and legal zoning costs, only to come in and have you tell them, okay, now that we're fixing these numbers, by the way, you have the bathroom issue, and you have a zoning issue, and you have a structural issue, and you have all these issues, and you better get them solved by tomorrow. You're doing your job, and they want to run their businesses, and I think what a lot of people are looking for is both a really clear instruction and a reasonable time frame to get it. Because we haven't, Don asked you, how long does it take you to review a perfect application? The problem is getting a lawyer and an architect to put that number together could take, 6 or 8 months, even if you don't need planning board and zoning board relief, and will cost a lot of money.
Right, but I haven't heard anything yet, and I haven't said it, and the chief and none of the enforcement people have said it, that anything is going to happen to shut anybody down. The fundamental question here seems to be when people want to increase, at least from my aspect of things, when people want to increase the number of occupants. And that, from my angle of things, and that if you have a number on your COI, that's the number that you operate on. And I certainly don't have a problem with that. It's the higher numbers that are your actual operating numbers are the issue. And I've tried to set up a path to make that correct.
The unintended consequences of correcting historic and sometimes baseless numbers could be shutting down some of these businesses or eliminating 50% of their tables. And that's just the plain truth of where this very well-intentioned exercise is heading, or costing hundreds of thousands of dollars in upgrades.
Well, I think the answer to that is at some point, the building owners have to make kind of a off-the-cuff assessment as to what's going on. If they feel that that they can't comply in any way, shape, or form, but they've been operating properly, then they need to go to the Building Code Board of Appeals to get waivers from those provisions where they think they're going to be impacted the most. If the Building Code Board of Appeals is the correct agency, it may be the plumbing board, it may be another board, but
My fear is that what we're looking at is the tap room where people get backed into a corner and then it's shut down. Yeah.
I don't know the history of the tap room. That's why it got shut down. Other than the fact that they went in and they tore the place apart without a permit.
They had other issues, but it was
Yeah.
shut down for a long time for everybody.
That's not an accurate statement.
I have a question. One restaurant was given new numbers by the fire department right before Memorial Day weekend, and those are supposed to be put onto the COI, as I understand it. There's a pending COI on your desk, I think, an updated COI for you to review.
The fire department wouldn't have given numbers. That's not their jurisdiction. Fire department does not give numbers.
Why don't you listen to what Andy
Yes, on Friday night, Sean and Bob came to see me, and I was given a verbal update based on the plumbing meeting that had been at, some numbers, which then I wrote down that night. So I called the office this morning afterwards, and she said that you had everything on your desk. And so I think we're all hopeful to try to get, our updates. And that was the information that Bob relayed to me directly. So he said it had come from you after 5 on Friday night of Memorial Day.
I think she's talking about the variance from the water plant. Is that true?
Yes. And that was the information given to me, and then I'm just trying to follow up so I can have my numbers all add up. I think that's all of our.
I can't, I don't know.
See, this is part of why this is so frustrating. I mean, your letter, which by the way was October 26th of 2015, so not quite 2 years ago. It said in it, and I think this is where the trap is, it says, it's not the intention of this exercise to reduce or increase the number of patrons you are currently legally entitled to. It is meant to provide accurate information to other code enforcement agencies and the public. Now, in a case of the Board of Housing and Pearl, the numbers are clearly tied to seating numbers that are clearly tied to old Board of Appeals decisions which aren't even applicable anymore. Those numbers are clearly not occupancy numbers because it doesn't take into account any servers or other employees or people waiting for tables or people coming out from having dinner, the changeover times, people standing at the bar. But you're saying that any change in that number is an increase. I just can't get my head around it. It just doesn't
Right. Well,
make
unfortunately,
sense to me.
yeah, the only way I can explain it is that I have asked a specific question to my state inspector, and those are the numbers I am locked into. And this is not, with my conversations, this is not the only town that has this problem. This is, unfortunately, I'm one of the first ones to address it.
So
because we have active enforcement. So I am ongoing with the building designers. I know that an architect has been hired, and this is in the process of being solved.
But we're on year 2 of this. I mean, I've spent over $15,000 at this point on this process, and I know there are other people in the room who spent equal amounts of money, and we want to get to a point where.
So do I.
Well, and as I know you do, and just as far as what Don was saying, we're trying to get a timeline of, we were told to go to the plumbing variance, so we did that. Every time we've been directed somewhere, we've tried to keep every department in the loop. I keep Amy in the loop. I've updated Sean and the fire department when they come see me. I just want to make sure I can give my team accurate information, and the last
Right.
information I got, I asked specifically, I said, I'm really nervous because I want to get this in writing, because my overall occupancy number doesn't add up, and I can circle back to you on my specific.
Right. Well, the overall occupancy numbers may not necessarily line up on their face, but there will be one number at the top that will be the maximum, or somewhere on that certificate. The format might change a little bit, but there will be one number that will be the maximum, and then it will be broken down. But not all the certificates are going to be the same. So buildings are different, circumstances are different. Again, the goal is to have more detail both on the certificate of inspection and within the buildings themselves, that each individual room will be posted as to occupancy. Obviously, there's going to be somewhat of a triage with this, because not all buildings are problematic. Some buildings are pretty straightforward. All they do is dining. They don't have a bar area that's bursting at the seams at 10 o'clock at night. And they just have dining. And they haven't been the subject of the PD going down there repeatedly. Those are the ones that we're trying to identify. And that's the root of this issue.
So you keep saying you're locked into the number that we see on our COIs now. You can't reduce them, you can't.
I can't unilaterally reduce them. I can reduce them, I can increase them pursuant to the application process and the building code process. Correct.
Change these numbers.
Correct.
All we have to do is show you the information.
Correct. I just can't
That's all we have.
unilaterally declare, oops, I made a mistake, mulligan here, we're going to just change the
You're
numbers.
not locked into a number.
I am
That
not
is our
locked into
start.
it. I am locked into a process, not a number.
So the number is where we are, and you can bring you all this information, which most of us have already given you most of that information, and that should be reviewed, analyzed, and the numbers changed.
It's the older ones that have brought in what I want to, it's going to make things a little bit more complicated. Those are the initial ones. Those are the ones that says, okay, for my initial request to get these numbers, you did. You brought everybody, they brought in the plans. Those are the numbers. Some of the restaurants accepted their existing COI numbers, took it and ran with it. That's perfect. Like I said, that makes my life easy. The ones that brought in the drawings with 30% more people shown on the plan than they had on their COI, and then wanted that new number on their COI, therein lies the problem. That's why this process is, that's why this procedure is here. That's what we're working for, to make the number that you're operating on your legal number.
Well, it shouldn't
And
be a problem if they've given you the information and it says that's.
correct, but there's a fair amount of
So
information.
you're saying that they haven't given you the.
There is a lot of people who haven't even started the process. There are some people that are done, and others are not. But this is not applicable to most. Yes.
Just for clarification, I think a lot of people are in the second category,
You hear the
in
statement?
which they've got their new plan, they've got their new number, they bring it to you and say, COI increase, although I haven't changed nothing in my restaurant in 40 years, and your response is going to be, okay, you either need to become code compliant with everything that is triggered by this higher number, or go to the state to get a waiver. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. That seems remarkably unfair, but I understand that that is not your responsibility for that.
Thank you.
And then Amy, real quickly, I know we're wrapping up here, just, we started the day talking about compliance checks regarding the ABCC.
I don't do that.
I know.
That's one problem I don't
2
have.
hours ago, in case anyone's forgotten since. Who's charged with and with what frequency doing checks on occupancy?
I'm leaving. Thank you.
So we do need to wrap this up, and certainly we're all available for individual questions on your circumstances. And I'm going to speak a little bit for the fire department, and he can come up and hit me if I do anything wrong here right now. But I understand where this all heated up in December. I understand that, and I understand we've made some changes, and I know where some of those frustrations are coming from, and I've talked to a lot of you about that. I think inspections, and we've all worked together to say inspections, this needs to be done. Our original plan was it's going to take a year for everyone to get together, kind of get this right, do what you need to do, and that's always been our original plan. And I obviously know where that kind of went off the rails a little bit. What we want to do is, our motto right now is observe, document, and communicate, meaning inspections are done that do not disrupt your patrons, that aren't coming in and, making it obvious that something is going on. That's just observation, so we kind of know maybe where the problems are, things that need to be done. We document that, and then I think Sean Mitchell has been going through and communicating with you when he's there, giving us card if you have questions, that sort of thing. The only time that they're going to enter and do anything is if they see something of a life safety situation happening right away. If the door is bulging, people can't get out and they feel like there's something were to happen, it would be a problem. That hasn't happened. They absolutely do not want to close anyone down. I apparently was closing places down when I was in Boston a couple weekends ago. That's not happening at all. And again, I understand where this started. So I think we've worked together to come with a pretty reasonable plan for that. A lot of these numbers, as you know, get into the nightclub situation. Again, that's over 100 people. You have ill-defined aisles. You move tables, above average, sound and music. And, after 10 p.m. operating and limited food. Again, you should be serving food if you're serving drinks until 1 a.m., that sort of thing. So those sort of things start to sprinkle in, and we'll get there if your numbers get there with the sprinkler system. But again, I just want to say that's our approach. We're not looking to close you down, or, I've had managers call me saying their manager is terrified that someone's going to come and do that. Not at all. We understand you have 45 seats and you're going to have 60 people in there because you're changing over tables. Just have someone at the door who is aware of your flow, who knows what's going on. And I think, would you agree, that's kind of how we're approaching it? The number is the number that they have to go with, obviously, but they're reasonable and can understand those variances. And I apologize for anything that ever came across differently. Yes?
This is a change in ongoing process that everyone's given me away.
Yes.
There was some discussion that there would be some kind of possible liaison situation between the industry and the town. So most of this information is miscommunication.
Correct.
Street talk.
Yes.
So things get explosive when they don't.
Yes.
So are you considering creating some way that you can have a liaison situation so that these should be self-governing as well?
Right, and you've taken steps, and I've met with some of you, obviously, you've taken great steps, and I appreciate that, of organizing, being an association, and communicating, and that's helping us, too, as well. So it's not rumors and innuendos, I'm not putting stuff out there. You're helping. I certainly am in liaison with everybody, because I have to take all of their considerations and everything that they give me to issue the license. If you don't have a COI, you shouldn't have a liquor license. If you don't have your health permit and you're a CV, someone else did that, they failed their inspection and decided to still open. That's not okay. So all those things come into play for the licensing thing. Absolutely, I would be the conduit for all of that, and I want to be, and I appreciate you organizing and helping with that. So whenever there's a fear or something's going on, let me know, and then I can get out to everyone for that. That sound good for now? I mean, communicate again everything we talked about, the list that Steve was talking about. We do have online on the licensing page. I can email that out to any of you. If you have any questions on where to start, just let me know, and we can direct you. Jonas?
Just to clarify, Sean, maybe you could explain occupancy, how the process works when you come to inspect this? Or is that,
Yeah, I think...
If they visually see that they know
Right.
They look in,
But
and
if,
then someone at the front says, hey, I have 32 seats here, I have 14 people over there.
Right.
My number right now, it's not this visible, like everybody's got a filter.
right,
The person in charge talks to the person who
there should be, correct.
on a one-on-one basis, say, this is where I'm at.
Yes,
Comfortable with what's going on, I feel comfortable because I know that I have 82 people in my building right now.
correct. I think, obviously the number they have in the COI is the number they have to legally go by. I don't know if you've been person to person, you can answer that.
So I think beginning about a month ago, that's exactly how it's gone, is we have either gone to somebody who's at the door or asked somebody at the door to find the manager or the owner to come speak with us outside and make sure that they're aware, first of all, of what their number is and how many people are inside the building. And if they've gone over that, is there a reason why? Whether people showed up early or people are at the bar waiting to sit, things like that. We're not, despite what you may have heard, we have not forced the removal of anybody from anywhere. So, if you have any questions.
I think I was trying to clarify how the process goes with, the fire department will actually do the inspection, correct? They have
So the fire department is charged with enforcing the occupancy limits, yep. And that number is whatever is on your COI. So whether that's the correct number in your eyes or not, we can't guess a number. We have to go with that number that's on the COI. Yes?
Are the fire department going to issue violations if we are over our capacity on our COI as against you guys just coming and noting what is going on?
So the question was, is the fire department going to issue violations, penalties? I can't make a blanket statement. Tonight I could go out and if your number is 70 and there's 200 people there, then there's a potential for a penalty or a violation. However, what we've done to this point is try to work with you, make sure that you're aware that your number is not 70 or 200, that you're aware what that number is, and try to bring it back down to that number.
Let me rephrase that. For the purpose of safety, you guys are coming and identifying what's going on, but if the COI is, say, 39 people, and you can clearly accommodate 60 people relatively safely, and you guys come and recognize that, yeah, we know how many people's in the building, we know what's going on all around us, we're aware of who's in what corner, how much they've consumed and everything, and things seem to be pretty safe, that we're not going to get rid of that or 2 weeks later to say we were in violation that night.
So the number that we are charged to enforce is the number that's on your COI. If you feel that it's 39 and you can have 60, then that's something that needs to be addressed with the building department. But like Amy said, we are looking for life safety. So if we see obvious life safety where people are crowded by the exits and they can't get out, then that needs to be addressed. Does that answer your question?
I mean, we're talking about the letter as far as warning 10,000 and sprinkler the building. I know that initially went out, which is the law. That's the law in that sense. But we're trying to work with everyone right now in this process. And again, life safety being the most important thing. And they can't make promises of any kind with a number. But, he has to go by that number and life safety on that. So, but no fines have been issued. If it's a consistent problem and I get reports consistently that something's over, then we might have to issue a warning on the license. But as of this time, we're just trying to communicate with everyone and work with them through that. And I think in cases where we had some overage, they just asked that, patrons not be let in until some more people left and that sort of thing. And the Memorial Day weekend thing, I think there were some adjustments based on what happened with the Board of Health, that it was a last minute thing and was unfair and felt like we needed to kind of work with folks on that one. So I think that's where that came from, which we did with a couple people. So anything else? Again, please email us, call us if we can answer any other questions from here. Thank you. Sean, is this you?
I was just going to thank everyone for coming today. It was really nice to see so many faces here. And just want you to know that this is a priority. We recognize that we're in a tourism economy and that you have a very short season to make a living. So I just want you to know that the Board of Selectmen understands that. Thank you.